Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science.
There were days where we thought we wouldn't make it out, but we stuck it out. Today's our day.
You've come to the right place.
Today's our day.
Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
This is a time when many people think about what they would like to be different in their lives. They make resolutions, they do some self-evaluation, and one area that always gets looked at is somebody's relationships. And quite often this means they're romantic ones. This is actually a good thing, and it's actually an idea that shouldn't happen only once a year. And many people are looking for information on how to improve this important aspect of their lives that they can actually use. Well, today you're in luck. Dr. Ronald Riggio, he's an author and the Henry R. Kravis Professor of Leadership and college is here to do just that. So, Dr. Riggio, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about this.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
This is something everybody does. Frequently, people take a look at their relationship. January is the busiest month for both marriage counselors and divorce attorneys, which is crazy.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you kind of take a look at this concept of improving relationships head-on in an article that you wrote that's on the Psychology Today website called 7 Psychological Strategies to Strengthen Relationships. And let's just jump right in with what you're talking about, because this is a time-limited show and I want to get to all 7 of them. So the first 2 you talk about is something called the expectancy effect, and then the other one is called positive social support. So how do you define each of these, and what makes them important for strengthening relationships?
Okay, so the first thing is that that all of these strategies are well proven through psychological research. So they're based on on basic constructs and concepts in psychology. So the first one is the expectancy effect. It's sometimes called the Pygmalion effect, and it's this idea that if we hold positive expectations about other people's behavior, then what we do is we actually subtly influence their behavior in line with those expectations. So if we hold positive expectations about people, if we believe that our partner will show us affection or will do something positive, something motivated, that we will subtly communicate that through nonverbal channels, and that the person will actually become what we expected, and that's why it's sometimes called the Pygmalion effect.
So that's really kind of interesting, because I'm wondering if that's in alignment with what I frequently tell my clients, which is to give their partner the benefit of the doubt, that if there's a couple of different ways to interpret their partner's behavior, they choose the one that puts it in the most positive light.
Yeah, and I think in some ways that's a sort of an adjunct to this. But the issue with the expectancy effect is you really have to believe that they're going to improve, right? So it's that, I have faith in you. I know you can do it effect. And so if our partner's trying to quit smoking or something like that, it's that positive expectation. I know you can do it. I know you can overcome this.
Interesting. And as you're talking about that, I'm just flipping through things that my clients have said to me about their partners. And it's usually very negative, because we kind of get into this negative feedback loop. And we go from looking at our partners in positive ways as wanting to make us happy, as wanting to do the right thing. But then we tend to focus on the things that they aren't doing. And the focus that you talked about the nonverbals is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. So this idea of, I think you're on the right track here, is that we emphasize the negative. We should emphasize the positive, right? We should be reinforcing. We know that positive reinforcement is always better, right? To encourage behavior rather than punishing them for inappropriate behavior. Encourage them in the positive behavior, right? Go in the positive direction. And you mentioned that the
catch them doing something right. Or doing something positive, correct?
Right. Well, in fact, there's catch them doing something right, and reward them for doing something right. So rather than punishing for doing something wrong. And then you mentioned positive there. The second component was the positive social support. And it's a similar kind of thing. So when we think about our support networks, we think about that network of close friends and family members. And we just think that having them there is positive, right? So we have the support network. But it's really about the behavior of the support of others. So in this case, when we're trying to provide that social support to a loved one, we want to focus on the positives and avoid the negativity. So we've all had a friend who is one of those "I told you so" people. They focus on the negative, right? And in essence, those two are going together with the sort of expectancy effect of saying, "Well, I knew you were going to fail. I told you were going to fail. I told you so. Don't fail anymore," right? And so it just doesn't go together. So a much better strategy is to give positive social support, to focus on the positives and not on the negatives.
So does this kind of correlate with something that was bandied about maybe a year or 2 years ago about divorce being contagious? That when, if people in your social network are either divorced or not in great relationships, then that can kind of bleed over into your relationship because, that's kind of what they're talking about when you all get together.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, what happens in those situations is you're drawing attention to the negatives. And, we can all find negatives but if you focus on the negatives and ignore the positives, then you're really, going to be in trouble. And that's one of our ways to make your partner better, to make the relationship better. That's one of the other strategies that we'll talk about, that cognitive reframing, right?
Right, and so this is kind of interesting because who you're associating with can really make a difference. And I've seen several relationships really struggle when maybe one of the in-laws is constantly bashing the spouse, or that you have these negative impacts, or if you go out and hang out with people, because when I was studying to be a marriage and family therapist, my friends were going, "Oh, I can't wait till you get licensed," and it's like, no, I can be your friend or I can be your therapist, but I can't be both, meaning the friend will go, "Yeah, that's really terrible, and that person was really awful to do what they did," and your therapist would be, "And your part in it was what?"
Yeah.
Because and I think that we don't fully understand the impact or the influence of the people who are around us. And I think that's what you're really saying with this social support, positive social support piece.
Yeah, it's sort of be there and listen. It's sort of listening rather than telling, right?
Okay.
And very often, our partner just needs to be heard, and we need to be empathic and supportive. And I mean, we're all guilty of this, and particularly in men, because there's a tendency, guys tendency to jump in and try to solve problems.
Exactly.
And a lot of
to
times.
fix it.
Yeah, to fix it. And if the person is asking you to fix the problem, then jump in and fix the problem. But if they're just there to really have a supportive ear and to have someone listen to, their problem, then that's what you need to do. You need to do what your loved one needs you to do.
What a concept. So let's go on to the next couple that you mentioned. And one is called the norm of reciprocity. And that one kind of really bothered me a little bit. The way you described it. And unconditional positive regard, and these kind of seem to go together. So can you talk a little bit more about them?
Yeah, well, the norm of reciprocity is very, very common. If someone, and the saying, one good turn deserves another. So if somebody does a favor for us, we feel sort of compelled psychologically to return that favor. All right. Psychologist Robert Cialdini, Arizona State, he made a big deal about this norm of reciprocity, and he did things like a study where he sent people Christmas cards, random people out of the phone book, and guess what? He got a whole lot of Christmas cards back. Because of this idea, if somebody does us a favor, sends us a card, gives us a compliment, then we're supposed to return that compliment, right? And what we want to do is use that to our advantage, right? We don't want to take advantage with the norm of reciprocity, but by giving, for example, paying our partner a compliment, we're more likely to get a compliment in return, right? So again, it's about focusing on the positive, right? So,
well, and I love this because that right there, the norm of reciprocity kind of highlights the fact that one person can really bring about change in the relationship just by doing things like this.
Absolutely. Doing a favor, completing a chore, doing one of your significant other's chores. And then just doing it, and then you don't have to necessarily invoke the norm of reciprocity. You could say, I did that for you just because I love you and I wanted to make things easier for you. But we know that back in your partner's mind, it's going to be, boy, I've got to return that favor someday.
Right, but it also sets up positive regard for you. And again, the reasons why you're doing it, and to me, intention matters, motivation matters, that if I'm only doing it to get my partner to do something for me, it's probably not going to work, but it's being done in that generosity of spirit that, oh, I see you struggling with this, or so let me just go ahead and do it. I mean, my husband and I have this thing for years that whoever cooked, the other one cleaned up.
Right.
And and sometimes I'll come in, to clean up the kitchen after he's done the cooking, and it'll be clean. And it'll be like, wait a minute, you weren't supposed to do that. That was my job. But he goes, yeah, you were tired, and or you were busy doing something with the kids, and so I just took care of it. And I have to agree, it made me feel good. It made me feel loved, and it also made me want to reciprocate because I wanted him to feel that way about me.
Yeah, and that's it. If you stay on that positive track, you're going to get, in-kind positive contributions, right? So the idea is that it's going to keep going. You can, I mean, and they do it all the time. I mean, advertisers do it in an inauthentic way, in an exploitative way, right? They offer you, you go to Costco and they offer you free samples. Well, why they're offering you free samples? Because you feel obligated. Now I've got to buy it.
Yeah. I never do. So how does this fit with the unconditional positive regard? Well,
I think we've kind of already gotten into that territory. It's this idea of, don't focus on the negative. Don't focus, so in your example, don't feel any resentment because now you're doing the cooking and the cleaning, right? Right. So you have to do it with the idea of positive regard, that I'm doing this because I really care about you. And then again, on your partner side, they shouldn't exploit that. They shouldn't exploit the unconditional positive regard. So, and it relates back a little bit to what we talked about with social support. So the issue with support is that it's give and take. And so when we look for support, we're taking, right? But we've got to be, we're also obligated to give. And what we have to do is we have to manage those supportive relationships so that it's pretty much in balance. You don't want to be giving all the time and have somebody else taking in the relationship. And, and then you're getting exploited.
Absolutely.
And that hurts the relationship in the long term.
Yeah, I think we've all had those friends where, I liken them to vampires. They just suck all the energy away. And it's like, okay, I can't deal with this anymore because there isn't that give and take. And that's really what a relationship is all about.
Right.
So This is Happily Ever After is just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Leslie Dories, and my guest today is author and professor Dr. Ronald Riggio. And we're talking about things that you can do starting today to improve your relationship. And if this is something you are wanting to do but aren't sure how to implement these strategies, I got to tell you, you're not alone. But you do not have to settle for a less than relationship for even one more day. I invite you to contact me and schedule your free, no obligation, Create Your Happily Ever After strategy session. You can send me an email at Leslie, Lesli, at foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS, coaching, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. Or you can give me a call at area code 919-924-0463. Again, that's 919-924-0463. Now let's get back to this conversation about strategies and how you can improve your relationship. And the next couple on the list seem to be a little bit more challenging, and this is cognitive reframing, and then the other important one is empathic listening. So what are they, and how can people actually implement them?
Okay, well, cognitive reframing is where this comes into play is when your loved one is troubled, when your loved one is dwelling on the negatives, right, on an illness, a misfortune, some stress that's happening at work or something like that. And the cognitive reframing is your attempt to provide a different way, an alternative way of viewing the situation, putting it in a more positive light, right? So it's kind of the old proven technique of having the individual focus on the positives instead of the negatives. So, let's focus on what's working correctly rather than the things that aren't working. Or, let's sort of count the idea of count your blessings, right, rather than focusing on what's going wrong. And, this is part of cognitive behavioral therapy, right? So this is
exactly,
the cognitive reframing idea is, we can go down that dark, negative spiral of just everything is terrible, everything is bad, and neglecting the positives. And so what you try to do with your partner in cognitive reframing is focus on the positives, get them to think about, count your blessings, think of the good things, not ignoring that there aren't bad things, but trying to do that kind of cost-benefit analysis in terms of, how are we going to move forward.
Yeah, and I liken this because the fictional character Pollyanna basically was a fantastic cognitive reframer. It wasn't that she just was going through life la la la. There weren't any problems. She's gotten a bad name. She's actually basically was, well, no, this is really happening, but let's see if we can find that silver lining in the cloud. And I think that this is. And I probably should have put these in different order, only because I think the empathic listening is a really key component to making cognitive reframing work. So can you describe empathic listening?
Yeah, so empathic listening, and it's very, very important, right? So the goal is to listen to your partner, listen to their thoughts, their feelings, their problems, and really doing it by fully listening and empathizing with your partner, right? So, our tendency is we want to offer advice, we want to make suggestions, or maybe stay away from that "I told you so" kind of thing. We don't want to focus on the negatives, but really, it's the goal is to try to understand your partner's emotions and concerns. And again, the empathic listening. This goes back to sort of Rogerian therapy, right? For those who have studied psychology, is is really just being there and being a supportive listener and trying to empathize. I get where you're coming from, right?
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
But one of the things, and I run into this a lot, is what if I don't get it? I mean, and I think that's one of the challenges because a lot of times I don't understand, or my partner doesn't understand why this seems to be a problem for me. My husband and I joke all the time because I'm constantly cold, and he actually invites me to put my cold hands on him to warm up, and then he'll go, "But I can't do that." I said, "No, because I don't like being cold." So he's like, "You are correct. I will never invite you to put your cold hands on me." I mean, not never, but hardly ever. And because we just have these different world experiences, and I think that's one of the big challenges for couples, this empathic listening, is because I really don't understand, and my colleague Michelle Weiner-Davis basically has said that understanding is overrated. I don't need to understand why you're upset. I just need to acknowledge that you are.
Yeah, right, and that's exactly what we're talking about with this, and it relates again back to what we talked about, the unconditional positive regard, right? So I'm going to trust that you're really feeling this way. I'm not going to try to correct your feelings, and so I'm going to reflect that back. Now, there's a really good book. I've been out a couple of years, but it's Edgar Schein. I don't know if you know his work, but it's called Humble Inquiry, The Gentle Art of Asking Instead of Telling. And I think it's a terrific book, and it's you can pick it up on Amazon, Humble Inquiry by Edgar Schein. And what he talks about in that book is that we sort of have to engage our humility and just ask questions to kind of understand where the other person's coming from, and not think about our own agendas or, and definitely the subtitle tells it, the gentle art of asking instead of telling. So rather than trying to tell someone what they should be doing, we're just listening to them, just this willingness to listen. And what that does is it sort of empowers the other person. And then they can start to work through their feelings and concerns. And you might couple that with kind of a cognitive reframing later on after you've listened to their problems and say, well, have you thought about trying it this way? Have you thought about focusing on what's working rather than what's not working?
Yeah, and that's an important second step, because most people need to feel heard before they're ready to take a look at it from a different perspective or try to find a solution. And I think maybe that's where that disconnect comes in, especially between men and women, because men just want to solve the problem. Mostly, and here's what people need to understand, mostly because they want their partner to stop hurting. It's not that they don't care about their partner's feelings or that they're just thinking that they know it all. They actually, what their goal is, they really want their partner not to hurt, and so that's why they want to fix things. But unfortunately, if they miss this empathic listening piece first, then it basically sends everything off into the ditch.
Right.
Which brings us to the very last point. And the reason why I wanted to put it off by itself is because I think it is an absolutely critical component to healthy, functioning, lasting relationships. And that is model forgiveness.
Right.
So in your definition, what does real forgiveness entail, and why do we struggle with it so much?
Well, forgiveness is because of the negative emotions. I mean, that's really what the problem is. So when our partner has transgressed, when our partner has done something wrong, we're hurt, we're angry, right? So the negative emotions. And when it comes to negative emotions, there's kind of a couple of things. One is that we sort of push them down and stifle them and pretend that they don't exist, and that's bad. Or the other extreme is we explode in a rage. And we know that our thinking is not good when we're exploding in rage, right? We're giving in to the emotions, and our cognitive processes aren't working very well. But also when we push them down, then what happens is if we push the anger down and the hurt, we don't deal with it, right? And so what we have to do is get it out in the open. You know, I'm upset, I'm angry, I'm hurt because of what you did. But, you know, so that's kind of the first step, is to make sure you're dealing with the emotions properly. But then the second is you need to decide whether you're going to forgive or not. And you can't do it halfway, right? If you're going to forgive, then, you know, you have to be willing to let it go. I mean, true forgiveness can't, you know, include hanging on to it and bringing it back. So you've got to let it go and move forward. And, you know, part of the forgiveness process, and we can go back a little bit to the cognitive reframing idea, is thinking about it. Well, it could have been a lot worse, you know, you know, and you know, maybe we'll transgress, and you know. So I think it's reframing the thinking about it, and really what it is releasing those tormenting emotions, you know, that are inside of you, and so you're by modeling the forgiveness, by forgiving the other person, they're going to feel better about it. I mean, because obviously there's going to be guilt and all that, and so
ideal.
and then when you transgress, the normal reciprocity is going to kick in, and they're going to say, "You forgave me, I need to forgive you. I need to deal with this." So it helps you now, and it helps you in the future, right?
And I think that one of the things that I try to stress with people is, because I forgive somebody doesn't mean that I'm saying what happened was okay in the first place. It just means I'm releasing that emotional energy. And, you know, frequently we'll have my clients, you know, say, well, you know, they'll tell me that they're over something. And what I will actually say to them is, based on how much emotion is in your voice when you talk about this, I am going to respectfully disagree that you're not over it yet, that there's still something there. I mean, you know, and it's truly out of respect, but it's like, you know, because there is this pressure to forgive. You know, it's, you know, your kids have a fight, and it's go hug each other and tell each other that you're sorry, when, of course, maybe they're not. You know, so
right.
They haven't gotten there yet. And I guess maybe that's, you know, and it's interesting because you have these listed as 7 separate things, but I'm not sure they're separate at all. I think they're pieces of a bigger thing, that they're all, as we've talked about, in many ways, one will lead back to another, which will lead back to another, which will lead to the fourth one. It's almost like I have this idea of this wheel, and they're all just spokes off of the wheel, where the healthy relationship is the thing that connects them all.
Yeah. No, they're all interrelated. So to kind of separate them out, you have to sort of draw lines between them, because they're all interrelated. You know.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're familiar with this book. My husband was given it years ago as part of his training, and it's a book called Leadership and Self-Deception. And I am not familiar with that, but I'll have to look that up. Yeah, it's a great book because, you know, he was reading it and he said, "You're going to love this." And I was reading. I go, "Yeah, this isn't about business. This is about relationships." And it really is about how do we keep our partner in a positive state. When I read this book, it explained to me how couples go from trying to please my partner, trying to figure out what will make them happy, trying to keep things going, to what have you done for me lately? And it's this piece of where I stop looking at my partner with positive regard. I stop trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. The negatives start to take over. And I'm sure you're familiar with the happiness studies where they show it takes 5 positive interactions to balance out or overcome one negative one. That's how powerful the negative is.
Right.
And it's easy when we're in the day-to-day existence to stop seeing those positive things that our partners do.
Yeah. Well, one of the things with the transgression and the idea of forgiveness is if you don't let it go, then you replay it over and over again. And so, we say, can you forgive and forget? Well, if you truly forgive, there's research that shows that you will start to forget it. I mean, not completely, but you won't, it won't have that compelling negative emotion arousing effect that it had, because over time you start to forget about it.
Sure.
And,
just ask any woman who's had more than one child. We forget.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's, right. That's why there's no real memory for pain, because if you had a true memory for pain, where you remember pain is in the second childbirth, and then you go, oh my God, I remember this, but you don't remember it right before, so.
No.
Anyway.
But I think people get really hung up, and I know that I've worked with clients around this, because they do get hung up with, well, if I actually forgive somebody, then it was saying it was okay.
Yeah.
No. And again, that's partially, somebody has to be sincere in their remorse.
Right. Right.
And again, but part of this is when all these components are working together, each one then becomes easier.
Yeah. Yeah. So the thing, too, that we got to remember, in a relationship, it's a two-way street. So we're talking about it kind of from one side, but there is this idea that the other person is working toward it. But here's the thing, and this is, and I actually wrote an earlier version of this, and the earlier version was focused around how can you make your partner into a better person? Right? And it was essentially the same strategies, but you're changing the focus, not how can I make the relationship better, but how can I make my partner better? And if you think about that, as you make your partner better, you make yourself better. Right? Because you're engaging in positive strategies. It's going to feed back because you're doing the right things for your partner. And that reciprocity idea that the partner's going to return it in kind for the most part. So, yes, both people have to work at it. But if you look at it from that angle of I'm trying to make you better, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for us, or I'm doing it for you. Right. Right. And so that's, I think, the strategy. I think in some ways that's a better strategy. It's a little more selfless, or at least on the surface. I'm doing this for you, but it'll actually, in the end, help me too and help the relationship.
Yes, as long as we don't get too upset because our partners aren't responding immediately. Sometimes we have to do things for a little while, especially for relationships that aren't that somehow have fallen off from their best. I mean, like anything else, I think it's always easier to keep something going than try to fix it once it's broken. But we can do that, but sometimes it's going to take a little bit of time for that pattern to be broken. And I think that that's one of the things that couples and people in general struggle with.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like your car, right? If you just ignore the knocks and the pings and you don't engage, you don't maintain it, you're going to have a big problem down the line in relationships. I mean, that's maybe a poor analogy, but relationships.
No, I think it's a great one.
If you don't work on the relationship, and what happens is we say, well, we'll work on it later, or we'll put it off, or we'll ignore it. I'm ignoring that. And then what happens is down the line, it's too far gone to have the effect that
Right, or there has. I kind of liken it to you go to your doctor for a checkup, and they'll find something wrong. Now, the doctor, if you wait till you have stage 4 cancer, they may be able to do something, but boy, is it a lot harder and a lot more expensive.
Yeah. So that's it. So this is really about maintaining. These are strategies to maintain a good relationship.
So where can people find out more about these relationship strategies? I know that you do leadership work, and to me, a lot of times the same thing that works in leadership works in relationships, because guess what? They're the same thing.
That's right. Leadership is just a relationship. It just has sort of different parameters, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I try to make this all fairly accessible. So I write a lot of books on leadership, and I write a lot of books on the workplace and that. But in terms of the relationship work, I put it on my Psychology Today blog. So if you want, you can go to psychologytoday.com, look up my name, Riggio, Riggio. Pretty unique name, so I'm the only one up there. And go ahead and look at my blog post. It's called Cutting Edge Leadership, but I do a lot of other things. I do some on body language, because that was something I was trained in early, first research. There's a lot on leadership. There's a lot on the workplace bullying and things like that. Mm-hmm. But occasionally I'll focus on relationships, and very often I borrow strategies from leadership, or I borrow strategies from peer relationships at work, and just give them a little more intensity, and they become love relationships, right? So
that's true.
The nuts and bolts of relationships. We're all human, and so there are lots and lots of similarity. So psychologytoday.com, and you can follow me on Twitter. I tweet out every time I post.
Terrific. So the adage that if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten is true. And it's never more so than in your relationships.
Love is just the beginning. And without skills, it won't be enough. So what skills do you need to master, and what will get you to take the steps to accomplish that? So I hope that one of the things that you do is to continue listening to this show. And until next week, stay loving.